All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to BuddyWalk with Jesus. As always, as we get started, we want you guys to know two very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. It is spooky season, and we are continuing with the thematic material. And this time I am able to do one of the things that I love to do as a content creator. And that is to showcase other creative Christians that are doing things in the space and creating new and different materials. So, I would like to introduce you guys to Steve Case. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Steve is the author of one of okay, I have to say one of the most creative takes on a book like this that I have read. So why don't you go ahead? I Who better to tell the folks about it than the author himself?
The book is called, promptly displays the book for all to see, the Frankenstein Book of Prayer. And literally the concept was, what if Frankenstein's monster could pray? Or did he pray? And what would he pray for? And or whom would he pray for? The monster from Mary Shelley's novel is vastly different than the Boris Karloff movie. Not I love the Boris Karloff movie. It is my favorite depiction, other than the original novel. But Mary Shelley's creature could read and write and reason and learn and speak and all those things. And I became obsessed with the idea over what would such a creature pray for. This being who had a tremendously screwed up idea of what the word creator meant, or father, because the only father he knew from the novel was the one who ran from the room screaming in revulsion. And
Right.
what would that do to a person? And so that was the creature I was after. So the book is literally the written prayers of the Frankenstein monster.
I think that's just getting right into one of the favorite aspects that I had from this book was the fact that yes, you are depicting a monster or a fictional creation. However, in doing so, you are going a very similar route that um, others that have brought this creature to life, so to speak, have gone and being able to see the fact that there's humanity
Mm-hmm.
to be had here, and really drawing that out of this idea, I thought was so captivating in what you were able to do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a character that I think gets maligned, and we, even by starting out saying the monster,
Yeah.
it's there's a humanity there that
Yeah.
that we don't always get to see.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. It was so one of the things that immediately came to my mind in asking or in looking over this book and reading it, and how do you walk us through the process of where this thought came from? Is this coming out of the mind of a long time horror fan and all of those kinds of things, or how does this come from idea to creation?
I have always had an affinity for Frankenstein. By the time I was in sixth grade, I was almost 6 foot tall. So I was a large, lumbering square-headed individual, who got called Frankenstein teasingly and bullyingly for a long time. And it was about the same time that I first saw the 1931 movie with Boris Karloff, and immediately felt a sympathy, not a fear of that creature, because I identified so strongly. And so I kept that with me. And in high school, I read the first novel by Mary Shelley. I'd seen pretty much any movie that had Frankenstein in it. I had T-shirts and toys and posters, which I still do around my office. I just love this character. And I started working for the church. I've been a youth pastor for 35 years. I was working for the Episcopal Church at the time, and came to love the Book of Common Prayer, which just got to me, and it started me on a collection of prayer books. I have prayer books of all the major religions, just because it's a very tactile kind of prayer, which I appreciate. And at some point, it just connected to have, what would this creature pray for, and how would you write a book that was the prayers of this creature, and so that other people who have the same kind of affinity, or my one of my own obsessions has always been to find a way to connect with people who would never pick up a prayer book, or who would never would never be caught dead in a church. So there has that line of thinking. A lot of my other books have been the same thing. I'm trying to reach the people to have a spiritual experience who have never come to church, and to let those people know that, no, you don't need to show up. You are welcomed. You are loved. As you said, you are prayed for, and God is part of your life, whether you believe that or not. So that those two ideas melded into the book. And once I got the voice, the whole book came out in probably 2 weeks. I couldn't stop, and it was just everything okay until my brain was dry, and then I could go start focusing on something else.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's so much in what you said that we're all themes that, like, so we started talking a couple of months ago when you first were posting around, like, hey, here's just for people that are content creators for the month of October, this is something that's coming out and all of that. And as a result, we became connected on social, and I've watched some of what you've been posting and different things like that. And so I got the tone both from the book and from your postings of some of what you said, but I'm glad that you overtly stated your positioning on this idea of connecting with folks that wouldn't otherwise be caught in a church, right, or maybe are the type that they've been exposed to some of the unfortunate aspects of the American Christian church and all of that kind of stuff. And so anytime that you get to meld those worlds of A, this is incredibly creative, and B, you've got a voice that's from a different generation than mine, screaming from the rooftop saying, guys, we need to remember to tell people that they are have and held, that they are loved, and that they are prayed for, and that this is a welcoming place where it is our responsibility as Christians to love on folks, without exception. Man, that's a powerful recipe to be able to have a tool that, like so many other tools that we can look at, that, yeah, sure, it's based in fiction, but it's still reflecting this ultimate truth that points people ultimately to God.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I part of it is working with teenagers for 35 years. You're trying to find anything that will connect you two, because half the time they don't want to be there. Mom and dad is making them show up for this. So how am
Yeah.
I going to get to you where you are? And part of that goes back. Part of it goes back uh, to make the reference of Jesus talking to Peter, saying, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And Jesus, the word in that passage, the word love switches. He goes from do you love me to Peter saying, I love you like a brother. No, Peter, do you love me? I love you. I love you like a brother. And finally, Jesus switches his word for love to match Peter's word for love, so that they can connect there. So all of my career, I've been trying to find the place where I'm going to connect with you where you are. I'm not asking you to, sign up for a 10-week discipleship course. You like horror movies? We're going to talk about horror movies. And I'm going to find the spot where you and I can meet and talk about God and acceptance and love and sacrifice and all those other parts where you are. So that's another part of the aspect of this book.
Yeah. That's being able to showcase those things through shared language, even if that shared language or shared enjoyment isn't something that would be, I guess, normative, like typical within a church. I think you get down to that's exactly what Jesus was talking about. That's exactly the same ball that Paul picked up after Jesus and ran with, that we saw in another context. And meeting people where they're at allows for the establishment of a reality. You had talked about tactile prayers.
Yes.
And that's one of the same things that I've come to seriously appreciate about prayer books.
Yeah.
I used to think that things like written prayers or liturgy or different things like that were just kind of dry, maybe even a little soulless. But I've come to this point of, man, that's really how you can connect.
Yeah, there's something about that. And I used to have, I gave it away, but I had a St. Christopher medal that was given to me by a woman whose kid was in my youth group, because she knew I drove this hazardous highway in Cleveland, Ohio for years. And it had belonged to someone she knew, but literally the image of Christopher was almost rubbed off, because someone sat there for year after year and rubbed this piece of metal, in her hands, and that as part of her prayer, and so the idea of having something in your hand, again, tactile, there's something that helps connect you to God that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like my generation, I got 100 behind me. We listened to music on an album, it was on the square, and you sat and you held the album cover, and that was the activity. You didn't do that while you did something else, and I loved cassettes. I love the sound of the cassette rattling in the box. I love holding the album cover when I listen to music. It's a tactile thing. Same thing applies to prayer.
Yeah, I as a musician, I've that nature of music that there's something to that I think brings out another layer of enjoyment in music beyond, don't get me wrong, I have Spotify on my phone. I'm not, it's not that I don't use technology for music, but there's something special about a record player or a cassette player or something along those lines.
The smell of vinyl,
Yeah.
Could spend hours in an old record shop, just going through the bargain bin until you find, oh, I've never seen this. It's a hunt.
Yeah. So so switching gears a little bit, as a longtime horror fan, you had mentioned it before, but I really appreciate the fact that you drew the distinction that, for better or for worse, most people think of Karloff's version of the monster when they
Right.
think of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful movie. For those of you that are watching that have never seen it, and you appreciate a movie with subtext and character stories and a different kind of character study,
Mhm.
man, I would suggest Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and the list goes on. Like any
Yeah.
really pretty much any of those Universal monster movies, because all of them have subtext.
Yes.
But it almost robs something of the Frankenstein character that, at least in the first one, he was lumbering and childlike, but in a way that he couldn't communicate and couldn't really reason and stuff like that. Whereas Mary Shelley wrote the character
Yeah.
to be this fully formed character, you know?
Yes. With no idea of his past, which I always thought was that he would. Shelley's character was almost like a newborn who was a full adult. He would have no concept of what had happened to him before, or where he came from, or any of that whole aspect of identity is gone from him. Everything is from the moment he opened his eyes, somebody else's eyes, for that he began trying to puzzle together his own identity.
Right. What do you think Christians can learn about this concept of identity from being able to, I guess, think more broadly about these different looks into character studies and things like that, without, oh, it's a horror movie, so it must be of the devil sort of thing, or holding with a tight fist what's okay and what's not okay, but looking around to say, this is how a creature wrestles with identity. What can I draw from that?
Yeah, there's some beautiful spiritual moments in some of the most frightening movies I've seen. I love a good horror movie. I was thinking of it earlier, the original Pitch Black movie. Are you familiar with Vin Diesel? And
Yeah.
Spoilers a little bit there, but the best part of that movie was his continuing discussion with the clergy about the existence of God and where is God, and we're in the middle of this horrible situation and you still believe in God. How can you do that? And the sacrifice that happens at the end of that movie, when Vin Diesel's character Riddick is saying, not for me, you don't sacrifice your life for me, I'm not worthy of that sacrifice. And then for him to have to then live into that sacrifice, that the change that becomes, that's a beautiful God moment, and there was I'm recommending another one, the movie Dusk Till Dawn, which is a vampire flick with Harvey Keitel's minister sitting there in the diner with his daughter, and she says, "Daddy, don't you believe in God anymore?" And he says, "Yes, I believe in God and in Jesus, but do I love them? No." And you think, and that's a scene in the middle of a trashy, gory vampire flick, and it's just so moving. And I have used that so many times with kids who I'm not going to sit through Bible study. Well, look at this, and then you're in, and then we can talk about it. And to tell somebody, don't watch a horror movie, don't listen to this band, that's R-rated, how dare you? Any of those things, you're closing God out of an opportunity, is in my personal opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's to say, to close those things off is to say that God cannot move through certain types of art.
Right.
And that's insane to me. That's absolute insanity.
Do not well, there's a quote, and I can't find it. Do not doubt, do not question the complexity of God's creativity. That was I forgot who said it now, but the idea of don't limit what is unlimited. That the whole concept of God is unlimited. To put God and say God won't speak through this is limiting God, and you can't do that.
Right. Exactly. Was there a moment in your walk in your life with God, where this kind of came alive, or was this idea of bringing God into the current context, whatever the current context may be, has that always kind of been there?
I this goes back. I remember being at a United Methodist summer camp in Northeast Ohio, and when in the third grade, as all good Methodist children do, you get your first Bible, and it was that red leather cover with the gold leaf, and it was an RSV and that tissue papery, and I remember taking that home and I put it on my shelf, and it's probably still in my parents' house somewhere because I never picked it up again. And then in high school, I'm at church camp, and the counselor says, "Get my Bible out of my backpack, and we'll plan worship for tonight." And his looked like it had been used as second base in a kickball game. It had coffee stains, and there was mustard, and he had written a girl's phone number on the inside, and it was just beat to heck. And I said, my Bible's in better shape than yours is. And he said, "When was the last time you read yours?" And I'm telling you, that moment in my brain was like, oh, and it took all of the sacred, of this book and put it right in my hands and said, "Let's look at it now." And from that point on, that was a change moment for me, was I began to find ways to make it tactile, put it in the hands of the people who most need it.
I have to smile knowing that there are folks that get that idea of there is a real and presentness to God, to our relationship with God, all of those things that isn't hyperbolic, that isn't metaphorical, that is very real in the truest sense. And that those people are working with the youth, that because for guys like me, for pastors like me that are working with adults that have no sense of imagination when it comes to this sort of thing, and God has to be in this box or look this way, or I only have to listen to Christian contemporary music and that's the only way I can connect with God, or anything like that, or a person has to look this way or sound this way or whatever. I'm like, why? At what point did you lose the wonder of the idea that we are talking about the God of everything engaging with us?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And there's a sense of awe that I think gets pushed out of kids when they start having to look at, not that you don't need the foundation. I believe you need to have the foundation there and then start there and see where can you go,
right?
Not put a lid on it.
Yeah. There's a need for theology prime, as I call it. The close-handed issues of the Christian faith.
Yeah, theology prime.
Yeah, but beyond that, I use the analogy of the playground, right? So many Christians that I've come across are so afraid of coloring outside the lines or being told exactly where on the playground that they can go. Well, what if it's just as simple as, okay, so we have the parameters of the playground, right? We have the boundary markers.
Right.
What if it's as simple as, from that point, go play? Go skin your knees. Go fall off the monkey bars. Go do what you're gonna do, but just go play. Go do, rather than looking so close-handed to, oh, what if I mess up, or God, what exact thing do you have for me? Just go out and try something.
Exactly. Absolutely. God will speak to you however God needs to speak to you. And
Right.
uh, I have a friend who says that God will speak to you in one of two ways. He will whisper in your ear or hit you with a brick. So you learn to listen for the whisper, because the brick is going to hurt every time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
teaching people to listen for the whisper, because that's where the voice is going to come to you.
Right.
In any way that it can.
Yeah. So, going back to Frankenstein,
Yes.
I recently they did a theater showing of Bride
Okay.
that my wife and I went to, and seeing it again in a post ordination world for me. I'm sitting back and I'm watching this movie. I'm gonna get your thoughts on what it means, or is there something to this idea of you have this creature who is introduced in a malformed sense into community, but is rejected by the community, and what we can learn from navigating relationships and love and all of that kind of stuff from being able to look at a flawed example of it. Does that make sense?
Yes. And a lot of it, I believe, is at least how I grew up. The clergy in my church were, now my age, white men who wore the robes, and if the minister came to our house when I was sick, you got out of bed and put on your good pajamas, when as a kid, and you sat at the table with the clergy, and you did not mess around, and you did not joke, for God's sakes, or something on that order, and to be able to experience God in the flaws, in the I like a Jesus who has BO and has dirt under his fingernails, and or in some cases other stuff that might be under his finger, that's the Jesus I want to connect with. And that's the flawed, the dirty, the that kind of Jesus is where I want my students to find Jesus. He's not necessarily going to be in the perfect picture.
Mm-hmm.
I like a religion that's flawed, because we are all flawed and we're all going to find our way together. That's, to me, the church is one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. Yeah. And we have to be able to understand that and not hold ourselves up above other groups of people, or people we feel we have to that who aren't quite worthy enough to sit in our pews. No, just get out there and worship with somebody in the street once in a while.
Yeah. I remember being a teenager when I wanted to believe, doing the whole youth group thing. Like, I wanted to believe it was all real, and I had the routine down and all of that kind of stuff. But there was no heart piece. And even at that point, I think I saw a lot of the ritual of it all. And I remember hearing this analogy that from now I understand. It's one that's been recontextualized for generation to generation. It's nothing new, but it's this idea of a homeless person comes wandering into the church, smells ratty clothes, the whole 9 yards, comes in, sits down, can't find a seat, so he sits down in the middle of the walkway in front of the pulpit and just wants to listen. And everybody's just kind of looking at him like, is what's up with this person? Like, almost in disgust and all of that. And if that person stepped foot into your church, what would you do with that? And I remember being struck by that, because that was like, okay, what happens when this person who is damaged, who is flawed, who has problems, who has baggage, all of that, what happens when they step foot into the building? And it's cool to see how God has brought me in a circle around that, because on one hand, that's the very concept when I was younger that forced me to say, I don't actually really want anything to do with this religion, because it's just a bunch of people pacifying themselves and judging other people and all of that kind of stuff. And so I stepped away. And then many years later, I had my actual come to Jesus moment and realized, yeah, no, that's exactly who Jesus calls. Now, unfortunately, we can sit here and talk about, I'm sure between the two of us, given proclivities and experiences and all of that, I am sure between the two of us, we could swap many a story about how those people weren't accepted, or that's not how it went down. But just because the people might get that wrong doesn't mean that Jesus didn't stand for exactly that. And now that very concept of drawing in the damaged, the flawed, the person who wouldn't be caught dead in a prim and proper religious setting, that is those are the people that I feel called to minister to.
Yeah. Now, I'll ask first, does your podcast, are you adverse to profanity?
No.
No, you don't want it, or no, you're not adverse to it?
I'm not adverse to it.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure. One of my other books that I have came out of, I had 3 students, 2 brothers and a sister, who lost both parents in 2 years. Their father to cancer, and then the next year their mother to suicide. And my office at the church where I was working became the place where you could say, fuck this, why is this happening, and you could shake your fist at God, and you could yell, and you could swear and punch and throw things, and that safe place that I created out of my office was what I put into a book, and the book is called Fuck Death. But it is written for the people who would never go to church. It is written for the people who are who are sick and tired of pity and condolence and all those other stupid things we say to people at a funeral, because we're nice Christian people, and what they really want to do is just scream, fuck this, why are we doing this? I don't want to be here, any of those things. And so that's part of the connection process that I'm trying to fit. And while I'm talking, my chair just fell apart on me. Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
All good.
Elevator dropped down. Okay.
Yep. Man, that I have often wondered how much of the cliche colloquialisms that we reach for are for us and how many are for actual people. Like, we feel like we need to say the right thing and do the right thing. So I'm so sorry. Oh, this must have happened for a reason. Oh, God needed an angel. Yes. I'll be honest. I'll be honest with you. When my son died, and somebody said that to me, that God needed an angel.
Yeah.
I have never in my life been more tempted to punch somebody in the jaw before than in that moment. I was like, what in the actual is wrong with you? Like, what provokes a person to say something that stupid to somebody grieving? And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the lunacy that centers around not just relating to people as individual people, when literally that's the very archetype from soup to nuts that we have for Jesus.
Yes. Or to happen to, I see, now my brain is running this way. I had to do a baby funeral when I was working for the church, and someone had actually come up to the mother to say, well, God knows you can always have more children. And you think, why would you say something like that? That's
Yeah.
got to be the worst. You know, I have there's a collection of the worst phrases that people say to other people at a funeral, but most of it is because we don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, so you say
Right.
the same old thing that everybody else has said, and it doesn't help. And then there are times when the church also will try to make you feel like your anger means you are not faithful. Like I'm angry at God, and people will come and say, well, then you're not believing enough, or you
Right.
don't love God enough to understand this is part of God's plan. It's like that's where the church does more harm than good, among other places. But
Yeah.
the idea of I'm reach the person where they are in their pain, feel your pain, feel your anger, feel your sadness, and don't try to push it down. Let it out. Talk to people.
Yeah.
Let feel what you feel. Don't try to hide it.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And in my experience, and to bring it back to the book, this is something that if you allow for creative voices to speak what they have on their heart, then you have the opportunity for folks to display a truth that is real for children, teens, young adults, adults, middle-aged, elderly, senior, so on, so
Yeah.
forth, enter in group that I may not have mentioned here.
Yeah.
And that's life is a series of questions. And sometimes we have to live, as Henry Nouwen put it, in the context of the question.
Right.
You don't ever get to know the answer to that question. I can't tell you how many times I have asked the question of all of the parents that do not care even in the slightest about their kids.
Yeah.
You like my son died? Why? You know what I mean? And I understand at this point, I'll never know, nor do I necessarily think that there is a to B answer in that very standard sense that as humans with control issues, we want to make sense of things.
Yeah.
But that idea of wrestling and being active in asking questions and poking and prodding at the realities and boundaries of life that ultimately brings about a deeper and richer and fuller understanding of the heart and character of God that we see when we understand that, and then can turn back to scripture and say, hey, this is the continuous narrative of God interacting with man, and through to Jesus, through to today, that God's character does not change. Then we can start to put the pieces together of what this looks like to be active, fully functioning citizens of the kingdom of God in the present tense, along with this idea of what we have to look forward to in the kingdom not yet to come.
Yes. Very, very well stated. I like that very much.
Yeah.
But I fully agree. And there was not my line, but somebody once told me that God does not make shit happen. That shit happens. That's why God gave us each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be able to answer questions from my students who lost both parents, but I can say I am going to be here with you while you are going through this, which is I think what was Jesus' basic message. I'm going to go through this with you. I'm not going to stop you from experiencing this. I'm going to be with you while you go through it. And that's what any of us can do as Christians. We can't I don't have answers when someone says mom died or dad died, but I can sit here with you, and if it's just you and me sitting here together in silence, I'm going to be present with you while you go through this, and that's the role of the church to me.
Yeah, 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 and that's the idea of truth being depicted in art was first brought to my attention when I read the Narniad, and I was older when I was exposed to C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
and all of that, and I was a very new Christian reading through, like, when I was in grade school or whatever, we had read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Yeah.
and all of that, but it was isolated and on its own, not within the whole context of the Narnia series. But that was the first time that I had saw an author take a concept, reflect it through a fictional story, but ultimately point to that that ultimate truth. And what I would absolutely recommend to the BuddyWalk community is, if you are looking for a piece of literature that seeks to reflect truth through this context, pick this book up, because this is one that doesn't shy away from asking questions and poking and prodding and going to places that I think for a lot of us, they may, obviously our contexts are going to look different of asking some of these questions, but some of these same questions, some of these same concepts, they're, like we talked about towards the beginning of this recording, like these are some of the same questions and some of the same human concepts that we wrestle with.
Yes, and that was part of the part of the book of the creature, the Frankenstein monster, to say, who am I? How am I supposed to fit into all this? And what if? How do I have identity if there's so many of me? If my eyes came from somewhere else and my hands came from somewhere else, and other parts of me are, if all of these different parts of me make up who I am, then who am I? How do I find out who I am? And how do I be loved and accepted by the community, and finally deciding yes or no that I ever will be?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Beautiful. So, not to put you on the spot, but favorite horror movie of all time, and then what horror movie do you think does the best job of reflecting concepts of God?
Horror movie for concepts of God? It has to be a horror movie? Okay. I love Dusk Till Dawn. I truly do. It is gory, and it is bloody, and it is vampires, and it is full of profanity, but just that minister in that story who has gone through something horrific and has completely lost his faith, and it is only when he finds his faith again that they can go out and fight vampires. And it's ludicrous, the idea of, I'm going to bless this and make it holy water, and you're literally filling condoms with water to make into a grenade, because now it's holy water, and now he's not a faithless preacher anymore. I am a servant of God. That's probably the best horror movie I've seen that reflects who God is. And I forgot the second part of your question. What was it?
Favorite horror movie of all time.
Favorite horror movie of all time. Lately, the last one that really gave me chills was The Others, with the Nicole Kidman, ghost story. That was the last time I watched a movie that I wanted to sleep with the lights on. Most of the time
Yeah.
I can shut it off, I can shut off the lights and go to bed. But that one was like, I started listening to my house.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this is yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a movie on cue that wasn't a horror movie that depicts the nature of God.
I more than any other movie in my life, the Carl Reiner movie, Oh God, with George
Mm.
Burns as God, and the nature of him, uh, just the answers he has to question, all those questions that he gets asked of, are all the same ones that I would have. And it's, the idea of, why do you put, how can you permit suffering in the world? And God says, I don't permit suffering, you do. You can cherish each other, or you can kill each other. It's entirely up to you. And those moments throughout that entire movie and the humor in it changed the way I see God forever. That in every time I write about God or do something, that's the God I get in my brain usually first, and then we'll go from there on see where it can possibly lead. But
Right.
the old George Burns, the old comedian,
Yeah.
that's my God.
Yeah. That is a good movie. I have not thought about that movie in a minute.
Mm.
Um,
What's your,
Rapid fire.
well, but
Huh?
you answer that. You didn't. What is your favorite horror movie, or your favorite movie with a depiction of God? What is yours?
So my favorite horror movie of all time is Scream.
Oh, okay.
That is very much my generation,
Yeah.
and the fact of really exploring the psyche behind what happens when, for as much for those of us that are part of the post Columbine
Mm.
generation, there's been a lot of of conversation about violence in cinema and all of that kind of stuff, and the effect that that has on people and all of that. But before that even happened, this movie was really um, starting to push on asking that question of what happens when we interact with this art, and
Yeah.
somebody who isn't all there interacts with this art. um the one that I think does a great job of showcasing God is one that I have historically not been a big fan of, but the older that I get and the more life that I live, the more I've come to appreciate, and that's The Exorcist. Um, I used to think that movie was boring, not really like as impactful as some may have made it out to be. But when you I have I jokingly say that I have found the thing that goes bump in the night.
Mhm.
Like, I recently finally sat down and told my story about the reason why I quit doing things like paranormal investigations or doing demonology or anything else like that, because I looked hard enough and I found evil, and you know what I mean. And I'm the one that flinched, so I'm good. You know what I mean. So, but understanding the character work, and even if it is like off from what like every single theological practice that I would look to be accurate, I still think that there's a lot that can be displayed well
Yeah.
from that. um the movie that I think does a beautiful job that isn't horror at showcasing the heart of God is the Charlie Brown Christmas special.
Yes. Yes. Very good.
Yep. Yep.
And
Linus drops the blanket,
drops the
turns
blanket.
to the camera, and says, "This is what Christmas is about,"
Yeah.
and just goes for it. And I saw that movie for the first time three-ish, I think about 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. And it was at a point where I was asking all of the hard questions of what is the point of this life? Okay,
Yeah.
so I have this relationship with God. I have this thing. So what do I do with it? And all of that. And then I just got so like, I've never been a big fan of Christmas. In my house growing up, it was always an excuse for debauchery and all sorts of things. And so I never really dug it. And I was like, so what's even the point? Like, let's just skip the day. You know what I mean? I don't really dig presents. I'm not like a Christmas spirit kind of guy. Like, I really don't care. I was always more into Halloween and stuff like that. And then that movie squared the circle and answered the question that I had. Well, what's the point of Christmas? And I'm like, awesome, phenomenal.
That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown. God, that's great. I love that.
Yeah. So, any closing words before we bring it home?
Just if you're listening to this or watching this, go back and read Mary Shelley's book in addition to watching your favorite, whatever your favorite depiction of Frankenstein may be. And as you have said 100 times, you are loved. And as you are who you are loved, and you have the right to ignore anyone who tells you otherwise.
Absolutely. Guys, check down in the episode description for a link to be able to pick up the book. Guys, absolutely pick this one up. It is a creative take on what it means to explore humanity through prayer and asking hard questions. Steve, I appreciate so much you coming on, and I appreciate your time, man.
My pleasure, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, until next time, peace, y'all.